Well, welcome to this webinar, Transforming Open Innovation, Opportunities from Innovation Clusters. My name is Cecilia G, and I'm an analyst here at Lux Research, and I'll be moderating today's session. Presenting today are my colleagues, Holly Havel, Senior Research Associate, and Anthony Vicari, Analyst. Throughout this webinar, you can type any questions you have in the questions box on your screen, and time permitting, we will answer all the questions that we can. If your question does not get answered, please don't hesitate to email it to questions@luxresearchinc.com and we'll respond as soon as possible. At this point, let's jump into the presentation.
Thank you, Cecilia, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. As you know, today we're here to discuss open innovation and how open innovation is evolving. My name is Anthony Vicari, and I've been working on the Materials and Manufacturing Group here at Lux Research for 10 years, helping companies around the world craft their open innovation strategy, form and develop innovative partnerships, and explore new ideas and emerging technologies in order to better bring them to market.
My name is Holly Havel. I'm a Senior Research Associate here at Lux, and I've been with our energy team for almost 5 years now. But over the past year, I've really taken a deep dive into this topic of innovation clusters. And I spent a lot of time speaking directly with these organizations to understand the value that they provide their startup companies, but also the value that they provide for their partner networks. So we are excited to share some of the key takeaways from our research throughout 2021. With that being said, I'll hand it back to Anthony to kick things off.
Thank you, Holly. Again, today we're here to discuss open innovation. We'll begin by looking at how open innovation has evolved to this point, something that most of your companies are likely quite familiar with and have likely invested a significant amount of effort and infrastructure into building. Then we'll look at how open innovation is evolving and examine some ways that leading companies and leading innovators are working today to use open innovation to meet changing needs. And then we'll look at how your organization can best craft a strategy to use emerging open innovation and evolving open innovation in order to meet your own changing needs. Well, let's start with looking at what open innovation is. Many of you, again, are very familiar with current open innovation practices, I'm sure. And what traditional open innovation, as it has evolved over the past several decades, is a way to really fill your innovation funnel at the beginning with more new ideas. Open innovation gives you greater visibility into developments beyond your own core competencies and beyond the walls of your own organization. It gives you the ability to test and integrate novel ideas and technologies at much reduced risk and cost. And it allows you to create ecosystems for more rapid formation and vetting of early stage technologies. All of this has been very valuable for solving yesterday's problems. That's what today's open innovation has really evolved to do. However, the innovation landscape that we all face and the challenges we all face are rapidly changing, and open innovation needs to change with it in order to continue to be as useful as it has been. Traditional open innovation, or what we're calling Open Innovation 1.0, as I said, was designed to create an abundance of ideas drawn from external efforts to help you better and more efficiently fill your own innovation funnel, and to help you form one-to-one external partnerships, investments, and acquisitions with emerging companies and other innovators. In order to do this efficiently, groups like incubators and accelerators that focus on getting startups to the next phase of their own development by providing them with limited short-term support have evolved as one of the key components of the open innovation ecosystem. However, today, companies are facing a rapidly changing innovation landscape. Global megatrends like climate change, circular economy practices, digital transformation, and the energy transition are creating more complex, more multidimensional product requirements across a wide range of product categories and industries. They're accompanied by rapidly changing regulatory requirements and consumer demands in every location around the world. And in order to meet these needs, traditional open innovation is not sufficient. The need is no longer just to accumulate ideas, but to turn those abundant ideas into systematic transformation in order to meet these complex challenges. And doing that requires changes that span multiple value chain stages, multiple business units within a company, multiple companies within an industry, and often the cooperation of multiple industries. Traditional open innovation, again, is not sufficient to achieve this goal effectively. And so open innovation now is evolving, as companies need to innovate faster on more fronts at once to solve more complex systemic challenges. They need to form deeper and broader partner networks. And one of the ways that Open Innovation 2.0 is helping to do this is through innovation clusters. Now, what is an innovation cluster? Well, an innovation cluster is a community of innovators and stakeholders that provides access to funding, mentorship, facilities, and resources for emerging companies in order to share insights and learning and to make efficient connections and partnerships. Now, the idea of an innovation cluster is not itself new. Many of you, again, are familiar with the Open Innovation 1.0 innovation cluster types like incubators and accelerators. However, innovation clusters themselves are changing in order to meet new needs, and they're changing in a variety of different ways. Over the past 2 years, Lux Research developed a fingerprint of 10 metrics in order to evaluate innovation clusters on their technology portfolio, business execution, and maturity. That is, what is the maturity of the technologies they work with? What is the value of the technologies of the companies in their portfolio? And how well does the innovation cluster help its portfolio companies achieve business success? Over the course of these 2 years, we have interviewed 17 leading global innovation clusters in order to evaluate them using this fingerprint. And here you can see how that looks on our Lux Innovation Cluster map. Now, when we look at the scores of these innovation clusters, we divide them into 4 main quadrants. The first are the nurturers, which focus on technologies that are in their early development, including discovery and initial assessment. These only provide their portfolio companies with modest amounts of support, and they're not committed to any single technology area. There are the futurists, which invest much more significant amounts of time and resources to develop earlier stage technologies, and are thus more committed to the success of any given technology in their portfolios. There are the networkers, who work with relatively more mature technologies, and these clusters have relatively lean business models that provide minimal support to their technology companies and more focus on getting them into markets. Builders are actively engaged in supporting more mature technologies as they move towards the later stages of their commercialization process. These clusters support prototyping activities, product deployments, and things like that by providing a variety of services to their portfolio companies. Today, we're going to be looking at how these new types of innovation clusters are able to improve open innovation. Now, that first category, the nurturers, are where the traditional incubators and accelerators that most of you are familiar with reside. And so the nurturers include most of the older and more traditional types of incubators and accelerators. These are typically focused on early stage startups looking to get started. They're very valuable for traditional open innovation. However, the newer types of innovation clusters, the other 3 quadrants, are what are evolving towards meeting today's increasingly complex challenges. And so for the rest of today's webinar, we're not going to be talking more about the nurturers. Instead, now I'm going to turn it over to Holly Havel in order to start us looking at case studies of each of the 3 other quadrants and how companies are using innovation clusters today to best achieve their Open Innovation 2.0 goals.
Thanks, Anthony. As Anthony just explained, nurturers represent traditional open innovation practices. So in the following slides, we are going to show you how these innovation clusters have evolved into what they are today: futurists, networkers, and builders. So beginning with futurists, unlike nurturers, they are more deeply involved throughout the development process and typically work with startups for longer periods of time, thus enabling strategic partners to have a stronger influence on technology development for early stage concepts. Companies that have aggressive sustainability goals and longer term outlooks may be well suited for partners for futurists, opposed to companies who are looking for short and near term technologies to deploy. Because futurists work with early stage concepts that have long development timelines and are far from commercialization, these clusters tend to have strong government support that are typically tied to regional goals relating to sustainability, economic growth, and technical needs. Since futurists work with these early stage technologies, they are good programs to monitor and may plant seeds for certain technologies that will be interesting for your organization down the road, but aren't ready now. One example of this involves Singapore's Ecolabs, not to be confused with Ecolab. So Ecolab's Center of Innovation for Energy is a joint initiative in Singapore that supports deep energy technologies as they transition away from academia and prepare for market adoption. One of the center's major differentiators is its focus on testbedding sites for specific applications and use cases requested by their corporate partners. So these testbedding facilities include high-tech labs, specialized test centers, and pilot projects in real-world environments. But on top of their syndicated incubator program, the Innovation Cluster has also recently launched a new initiative to drive Singapore's goals in decarbonizing their marine sector, which is one of the biggest ports in the world and acts as a major maritime hub that connects to ports globally. The program, called Green Marine, will focus on scaling technologies in 4 areas: port electrification, energy efficiency and carbon removal, low carbon fuels, and circular economy. So in this particular case study, decarbonizing the marine sector is a regional development goal that has strong government support and connections with local innovation ecosystems. The maritime industry will remain an important contributor to Singapore's economy. So the initiative aligns with the government's goals to drive innovation and investment in the sector while maintaining long-term success throughout the energy transition. The initiative is still in the process of selecting companies to participate, but will utilize its network of government, academia, and private investors to provide startups with project funding, long-term investment opportunities, lab support, and access to technology experts. More importantly, though, the initiative makes use of Singapore's unique ecosystem as a launch pad for both initial market entry in Singapore, but also for global scale-up ambitions. So because of their strong support from government, futurists can act as test beds for future technologies in a particular ecosystem and subsequently help translate those technologies in global markets. Networkers, on the other hand, don't provide significant direct support and resources to their portfolios, but rather utilize the skills within their partner networks and broader innovation ecosystem to facilitate services based on a particular company's needs. So as the name suggests, networkers are designed to have large networks so they can put together the necessary stakeholders from industry, academia, and government to support a particular technology and bring it to market. So companies who are focusing on technologies that solve a particular problem within their industry, but don't have a clear way of bringing it to market, should look for opportunities with networkers as a way to connect with a variety of stakeholders and find ways to tackle market challenges using a multi-industry and multidisciplinary approach. So this brings us to the Carbon to Value initiative, which was spearheaded by Urban Future Lab to create a new innovation ecosystem specifically for carbon tech. So technologies that capture and convert carbon dioxide into valuable end products or services. The initiative is a 3-year-long program with the ultimate goal of unlocking a new carbon tech economy and accelerating the carbon tech industry. The Carbon to Value program has a few distinct features that make it really unique. First and foremost, it pools the resources of 3 innovation clusters into one accelerator program. And secondly, the initiative engages with an invitation-only leadership council that is comprised of industry, academia, nonprofits, and government entities across diverse industry sectors who all have a direct influence on the future of carbon tech. And lastly, it brings together early-stage carbon tech innovators who have unique products and services, but lack the market insight needed to identify and even create new markets for their emerging concepts. The companies developing these technologies have high potential value, but they lack the power to create and sell into new markets. So by pooling resources from several innovation clusters and from a variety of stakeholders, this new framework exposes early-stage innovators to market makers and provides value in identifying product market fit. So now I'm going to turn it over to Anthony to share our final case study and closing thoughts.
Thank you, Ellie. Compared to the futurists and the networkers, builders are in some ways the most natural evolution of the more traditional nurturer incubators and accelerators, in that they focus on getting companies and their technologies closer to coming to market through similar kinds of support. What differentiates them is that they provide higher levels of support over a longer time frame and tend to focus on companies further into the higher technology readiness levels. They also tend to work more closely and make closer matches with corporate partners and other partners. This gives builders stronger insight into market needs, and so can more efficiently match startups to business needs. And so if you're looking to have startups work with you in order to meet your own specific needs and find startups that are well suited to your particular needs and collaborate with them deeply, a builder might be the kind of innovation cluster that's best suited for your open innovation requirements. Now, the builder category includes both industry and technology focused clusters. But today in our case study, we're going to be talking about Greentown Labs, a world-leading innovation cluster that accelerates early stage technologies and connects them to partners and investors in compatible industries and applications. In particular, Greentown Labs does have a traditional syndicated incubator or accelerator program. However, on top of that, they also have a program where they work with a particular corporate partner in order to develop a custom accelerator targeted toward that particular partner's needs. Today, we're going to look at how Greentown Labs has been working with Mitsubishi Chemical. In December of 2020, Greentown Labs and Mitsubishi Chemical worked together to launch the Kaiteki Challenge. Mitsubishi Chemical had particular needs looking at alternative proteins, sustainable packaging, and plastic recycling, and put up $25,000 worth of funding and opportunities for startups that could help them meet those needs effectively and efficiently. Greentown Labs, over 4 months, went and solicited applications from 115 startups from 35 countries, and then filtered those down to 6 finalists. And those finalists are now working on a 6-month accelerator program to demonstrate proof of concept of how their particular technologies can best meet Mitsubishi Chemical's particular needs as defined in the Kaiteki Challenge. Now, there are services out there like PitchBook that many of you, I'm sure, use on a regular basis to identify companies working in a particular space and innovative startups. Not many of you may work with Lux or are familiar with what Lux does, and know that working with us can help you, dig through that landscape, identify which companies might be best suited to your needs and which might make good partners based on where they are in their own development journey. But working with an innovation cluster, a builder like Greentown Labs, in this kind of close collaborative way, can very efficiently sort through those large sets of companies for those that are able to work closely with you to develop their technology in the direction of your particular needs. So when you come time in your open innovation journey where you want to put together a set of companies to meet a challenge and collaborate closely with all of them, this kind of program can do so much more efficiently than traditional open innovation or many other services are able to accomplish. Now, in the recent slides in the case studies, you've seen some examples of how companies are using new types of innovation clusters to meet open innovation needs that are in some ways too complex to do with traditional open innovation 1.0 methods. Whether it's futurists looking at longer timescales that individual companies may not be able to sustain, or looking at regional development goals that are more complex than one stakeholder can really put together. Whether it's networkers who need to put together many different stakeholders in order to create a market for new types of technology that everyone knows they're going to need at some point, or whether it's builders helping companies work with large groups of startups efficiently at once. Doing this effectively requires developing a different kind of open innovation strategy than traditional open innovation needs, and is different than how you've developed your open innovation strategies at your company so far. And the first step of how to develop this new kind of open innovation strategy is to know what your goals are. That may sound simple, and it's certainly true for almost any major project, but innovation clusters vary very widely in their structure, goals, and capabilities. And so selecting the right type of cluster to work with to achieve your organization's specific goals is a critical step in being able to leverage their unique and changing capabilities. The second step of developing an open innovation 2.0 strategy is to choose your metrics carefully. Again, this is something that is true for any project, but having the right metrics is especially critical for aligning your project with the particular innovation cluster you're working with. Innovation clusters often have their own metrics that they use internally, but these are very unlikely to be the same kinds of metrics that you and your organization care about. With a traditional incubator and accelerator, these are often things like follow-on funding and helping the startups form partnerships, things that are important from a startup's point of view, but aren't the things you're going to measure to determine the success of your own relationship with an innovation cluster. In the last category, if you're going to attempt to work with these new types of innovation clusters, you should be using them to change the limits of what is achievable. If you have a goal that can be achieved with a one-to-one partnership, then traditional open innovation methods may be sufficient for you. But by leveraging these independent networks of many and varied stakeholders that innovation clusters can put together, you can attain outcomes that are unachievable or infeasibly difficult and expensive and time-consuming with one-to-one partnership formation and traditional open innovation methods. Those types of outcomes that we've seen in the recent case studies suddenly become possible to realize much more efficiently. Thank you.
Well, Anthony, Holly, very interesting perspective into open innovation and the role that innovation clusters play and can play into how we move into a future state. So now we'll be taking questions that any one of you in the audience might have on the presentation, which you can type into the questions box. If we don't get to your question on this call, someone from Lux will be in touch after the webinar. So jumping right into it, I'm seeing a few different questions here trickling through the chat box. And I'd like to start here with one question that someone has asked, which is our company is embedding open innovation within our CVC and R&D teams, so corporate venture capital and our research and development teams. What are the best ways for us to work with these new kinds of innovation clusters? For instance, do we need buy-in from other business units?
So this is a very common type of setup, and it makes a lot of sense for Open Innovation 1.0. Those are the organizations that are likely to be working most closely with startups throughout the collaborative innovation process. However, what we see with Open Innovation 2.0 is that if you're trying to do complex, deep transformative changes and bring together multiple external stakeholders, you're also going to need buy-in from multiple internal stakeholders. You're going to need to align teams that include operational and business units. You might need buy-in from management and other groups within your organization. And so really there needs to be internal appetite for this type of transformative change to make the most effective use of many of these new types of innovation clusters, especially the networkers and the futurists.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. And maybe following up on that, a clarifying question when it comes to the networkers that you've talked about. There's a question coming in from someone here that says, you're saying networkers work with more mature technologies, with lean business models. how are these networkers different than a traditional consortium?
So there's certainly some overlap in spirit of what they're trying to accomplish, but I think the difference here is a few parts. One is who is typically leading these groups. In a consortium, there certainly is often participation from government and academic groups, but oftentimes consortia are there for corporates and startups to work together and to form their own relationships within the consortium. There's not necessarily a central player, whereas with an innovation cluster, with a network or innovation cluster, one of the key differentiators is that the cluster itself acts as a central node that in some ways plays matchmaker and can dynamically put together a set of companies and other stakeholders as needed to build the types of relationships and groups and markets for new technologies that are needed on a case-by-case basis. So it provides that kind of central node to create these partnerships more flexibly and as needed.
Gotcha. That is very, very clear. And it looks like another comment and question coming in. Really like the way you segment each quadrant. Which innovation clusters, though, have the most growth potential over the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know we talk a lot about the past and present role of innovation clusters. So it's important to think about the future and what that entails. So innovation clusters, they'll need to be agile and adapt to emerging trends in order to continue to provide valuable support for technology developers. So some of the main groups that we're seeing already doing this today are within the builders group. They are constantly monitoring technology and market trends. One good example is the decarbonization of mobility, because we've seen several innovation clusters in recent years within the builders group specifically launch programs for decarbonizing transportation, or they expanded their existing programs to include mobility. So I would say look at those types of groups that are constantly expanding the scope of the technologies that they're looking at, or looking at new ways to kind of bring all these players together. I think networkers are another quadrant that could see a lot of growth in the next 5 to 10 years, because they are already agile, since they aren't the ones providing a lot of support directly to the startups. So I can see them playing a big role in that, and even driving initiatives like the carbon to value initiative that we just saw.
Fantastic. That definitely helps my understanding of where these clusters are going to grow as we look towards the future. Now, just looking at the questions box now, and with the time check, it looks like we have just enough time for one more question. And here someone's asking about the geographies and localities. So another person is asking, a lot of the innovation clusters I've come across are predominantly located in the US or Europe, but what about emerging markets or other geographies?
Yeah, that's another good question. And that's definitely something that we found through our research as well. Most of the organizations that we spoke to are predominantly based out of North America or Europe. And they both have very robust and mature innovation ecosystems. But we're going to start seeing the need for climate tech solutions drive interest in innovation clusters across the globe, particularly areas that have very, very nascent emerging innovation ecosystems. So innovation hotspots include the Middle East, where motivating interests are largely driven by oil-rich countries exploring new revenue streams, and also Southeast Asia, where governments are scaling back innovation restrictions, and countries are also seeking low power supplies to meet growing energy demand. So there are definitely some big opportunities there, and something that clients should not rule out, but you have to keep in mind that not all of these ecosystems have the necessary support to provide to these early innovators. and attracting startups to these regions. So it is important for countries to look, it is important for companies to look for countries that have strong government support and favorable regulatory frameworks for innovation programs.
Absolutely, and that's a very important point to keep in mind, especially understanding what different national strategies are out there or what commitments and promises are being made. So with that last question, that's all the time that we have for today. Thank you so much, Holly and Anthony. Of course, this includes our webinar, but the slides, slide presentation and recording from today will be sent to all of you attendees via email. And after leaving the webinar, you'll be prompted to complete a survey on today's presentation, and we would very much appreciate any feedback you might have to help inform and improve future webinars. So with that, thank you very much for joining us and have a great rest of your day.